And actually,
Yeah.
oh, sorry, go on, Courtney.
No, I just to add to Byrne's point, I mean, he played a massive role on the Trump campaign's get out the vote effort in 2024. The president did performed much better with younger voters, and he credits that largely to Charlie Kirk and the work that his organization did for the party. They spent tens of millions of dollars. And, actually, one survey by TikTok found after the election that Trump voters under 30 trusted him most on that platform. And so I think that just speaks to, again, the influence he had on this voting bloc.
Speaking to people who aren't in America in the last few days, and maybe they've heard of Charlie Kirk if they're of a younger age themselves, because clips of him would come up on their feeds in other countries because he was so masterful in terms of turning content from some of his interactions into things on his feeds. But they've been asking me, why is this such a big deal in the US? Who is this person? Why is the president ordering flags to be flown at half-mast and saying he'd go to his funeral? And there isn't really a comparable person to Charlie Kirk in many other countries in the political world, because he wasn't elected, but he had this huge constituency of millions and millions and millions of people. And you see the post that J.D. Vance put up on X in the wake of Charlie Kirk's death. This long sort of laying out of his entire relationship with Charlie Kirk, and basically saying he wouldn't be vice president were it not for his interactions with Charlie Kirk. And we heard the president talking about that, as you've been saying, Courtney, that he basically wouldn't be president, perhaps, were it not for Charlie Kirk's influence as well.
I think it's also,
Yeah.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Byrne.
I think it's also kind of unique in that, the Trump family almost considered him a part of that family. Donald Trump said he was like a son to him. Don Jr. said he was like a brother to him. And that just shows kind of the level of influence and proximity he had to people in power, which even other personalities, online personalities, podcasters, they might have a kind of working professional political relationship with him, but he was really kind of seen as someone who was almost beyond that. And it had gone since 2016 when he was still 22 years old, 23 years old. So I think, the extent of those links is something that isn't replicated in the US. And I certainly can't think of any examples abroad when a young man has really ingratiated himself into government like that.
And it kind of goes to explain why we've seen this outpouring of commentary across all platforms and, on TV shows and on the steps of Capitol Hill as well, because he had this massive following. He was beloved by many, but as the governor of Utah, Spencer Cox, put it today, young people loved him, young people also hated him. He was a very divisive person. And so a lot of what we've seen online has been, really quite disgusting, hasn't it, in terms of how in some quarters people are celebrating the death of an individual, and then the arguments that are coming back. There's a lot of very divisive commentary that doesn't seem to be getting a lid put on it, despite the calls for calm that we've seen from many quarters.
Yeah, I think it's tricky because, again, of course, we're talking about a young man who lost his life to political violence and left behind a wife and two young kids. But I think multiple things can be true, right? This is somebody who conservatives praise as being a champion of their movement, of, helping bring, fill the enthusiasm gap among young voters. But, again, he also wasn't popular with those on the left, those he wasn't, necessarily aligned with ideologically. And he challenged a lot of their beliefs and criticized Democrats who saw him as somebody who fomented some of the toxic partisan landscape that we currently find ourselves in. And I think this, the divisions over his death sort of speaks to the moment we're in. We, both parties, Democrats and Republicans, hold these sort of exaggerated ideas about how much their rivals tolerate violence, when in fact both sides really, mostly denounce it. And that sort of leads to some of the misperceptions that we're seeing.
I also think that that approach, to a certain extent, of kind of it was very unique in that most of his events were as was the one in Utah, in which he kind of challenged people to their beliefs, and I think that particular approach really kind of made him popular with President Trump and people in President Trump's team in that creating those viral moments and generating controversy ultimately was beneficial. And it's approach that Donald Trump has taken in his own way on social media and before, in terms of generating controversy and generating a conversation and viral clips and viral moments. I think that really endeared him to the president.
Mm. And you can see people coming from a real place of grief with some of what's been posted as well, though, those awful remarks we mentioned a few moments ago, but then you had the responses coming back of people declaring war, was the word being used, on Democrats. Thinking of Congresswoman Nancy Mace saying the Democrats own this, and all of these remarks sort of being made before even we had known the identity of the suspect in this case. It just, it speaks to a place where discussion in this country has become so polarized that the first place that people go to is a very incendiary one.
Yeah, I worry about how much this will exacerbate that, right? I mean, this typically is a moment where, you have some sort of unity, everyone calling for calm, everybody, denouncing this. And I think that, of course, we've seen some Republicans pointing to corners of the internet where people are celebrating this. But I think that is some of the extremism of social media. You can find people being ungracious in parts of the internet. But I think if you look at, the leaders of the Democratic Party, they came out and denounced this right away. I don't think anyone agrees that this is the way to conduct themselves in politics, anyone in a leadership role for that matter. But unfortunately, yeah, I think this is the problem is, the question is, where do we go from here? How is this terrible tragedy used? How is it framed by each side? And what happens next, right?
I also think that to a certain extent, the kind of